Westworld is without a doubt one of the most complex and sometimes confusing TV shows out there, which doesn't make it any less addicting. Seeing as it's coming back for its third and possibly most epic season to date, we wanted to count down some of the things that you might have missed in the first two.
These violent delights have violent ends.
Ever since the insane ending of season, exactly what timeline it is that we are currently watching? Well, they've actually left a pretty handy clue to keep you on track. Keep your eye on the Westworld brand, usually placed somewhere in the background of a scene. In the past, the big W has a super retro 1970s design that indicates that the action is taking place way back when. And in the future, present, the logo is a much more sleeker, more futuristic W that almost looks like it could have been designed by Apple. The creators of Westworld obviously have an incredible eye for detail, and this next hidden detail proves that they have a pretty amazing ear for it too. Throughout Westworld, a haunting piano score can be heard. While it might just seem like a homage to a classic Western piano soundtrack, there's actually a lot more going on that you might have initially thought. The music you hear so often is really tinkering piano covers of contemporary songs, and this was done for a reason. The creators understand that we have an instinctive emotional reaction to contemporary music that we know and love, so by sneaking it in disguised as score, they can actually control how the audience is going to feel during a scene. When it first premiered, fans of the original Westworld movie were skeptical that the show could do justice to what is really an amazing film. Luckily for them, it has gone totally above and beyond what any of us could have ever imagined. But that doesn't mean that the minds behind the show have left the show completely in the past. They're actually huge fans. So much so that they even snuck in a cameo to pay homage to their source material. In season 1, when Bernard finds his way into the decommissioned area of the park, he walks past a very familiar looking figure. And that was no accident. They placed a replica of the original Yul Brenner Gunslinger character in the background as a way to pay their respect to the man who originated the role. With his obsession with creating human-like figures out of inanimate machinery, it's easy to make Ford out to be some kind of Dr. Frankenstein character. And if you think the minds behind the show aren't aware of this comparison, then you don't know Westworld. In one scene that takes place between Ford and Bernard, a very distressed Bernard asks Ford why he made him take out Teresa. In the scheme of things, but what he actually says is, "One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire." These aren't just Ford's thoughts. This is actually a direct quote that the Doctor says from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. There is so much careful thought that goes into the entire production of Westworld, from every single department that works to build the show that we see on our screens. One thing you might have missed, and that you are actually not really supposed to notice, is the way the cameras capture the action in Westworld. In everything that happens before the world goes awry, they shot everything using Steadicams and stabilizers to give the images a smooth, robotic feel. But then, as soon as the hosts start to break free of their programming, the camera department switched to handheld cameras in order to make the world feel as though it had been completely destabilized. Literally. It is a very subtle detail, but something that helps the show have a real emotional effect on the viewer. All the best creators and artists borrow from one another, and Westworld is no different. While there are definitely references to other sci-fi classics, there is one source of inspiration that might surprise you. The popular video game BioShock was actually a huge inspiration for the creators of Westworld, which actually makes sense, since visiting the park is very much like being in your own terrifying live-action first-person video game. They were inspired by the fact that so much thought and detail is put into crafting the backstories of the game characters, which are often totally ignored by the players entirely. They even snuck a bust of Sandra Cohen into Ford's office as a way to express their gratitude to the game for helping them create their world. If you're not already totally blown away by the attention to detail put into every corner of Westworld, then hang on to your cowboy hats because it's about to get even better. The show has always been careening full speed to some sort of apocalyptic ending. There's just no way to get out of it without burning the whole thing down, as it were. Ford himself has always spoken in pretty nihilistic ways, so he's not really out there looking for a happy ending to his story. So much so that the end of days is actually hidden in a ton of the characters' names. First of all, there is Teddy Flood, as in Noah's Ark, the great cleansing flood and all that. And then there's Wyatt, who the hosts describe as pestilence, which is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And then there's Hector Escatone, whose last name is a slight deviation of the word eschaton, or eschaton, a theological word that means the end of days. And it's not just the character names that have a much deeper meaning in Westworld, it's everything. Take the name Sweetwater, for example. The small western town where most of the original action takes place seems like it was just given some old folksy name to make it sound authentic, but it's a lot more than just that. It's actually a reference to the Great Western, Once Upon a Time in the West, which is one of Jonathan Nolan's favorite movies and biggest inspirations for Westworld. Weirdly, it is also the name of a 2013 movie that Ed Harris starred in which he played a sadistic sheriff not altogether different from his character in Westworld. At the end of season 1, Ford gives a speech in which he says that Mozart and Beethoven never died, they just became music. While that might seem like just a beautiful thing to say, it ties right in with the whole message of Westworld and how life and death aren't always as black and white as they seem. This comes back in season 2, when Logan Delos is showing Bernard and Dolores around the forge when they stumble upon a robotic arm that is writing all of what makes up James Delos into a book, which sums up that everything can be broken down into thousands of lines of code. But what you might not have noticed is that the contents of the book looks exactly like the lines of music that the automatic piano plays in the Mariposa Saloon. Season 2 allowed us to go a whole lot deeper into the Delos family and learn a lot about its founder, James Delos, in the process. Once again, when Bernard and Dolores are in the forge, it tells them how it created the James Delos host, and how that required it to create 18 million versions of him before it got it exactly right. And then, very disturbingly, they come across an insane version of the James Delos host hidden in a top-secret bunker, giving himself the old Black Swan treatment into a mirror. As it stands there giving itself the worst makeover known to man, it says to itself, "I'm all the way down." What you might have been too disturbed to remember at the time was the fact that those were the last words that Logan Delos said to his father months before he passed. This was the last interaction Delos had with his son, and it's explained that every time he gets to that part of his memory, the host goes insane. The Forge is truly a wacky place, filled with all kinds of hints and foreshadowing and clues about what makes Westworld and humanity for that matter tick. But one thing that might have slipped by really raised some questions with us. While Bernard, Logan, and Dolores are walking down a hallway, they pass a few scenes taking place in the background that are identical to ones that took place in season 1. Some think that this could mean either of two things: that everything that happened in the Mesa was being recorded and is being replayed for Bernard as he passes each room, or that these events simply happen over and over and over again, as both humans and hosts live according to a code and are bound to repeat the same patterns. Like we mentioned before, the Forge is a kooky place, and there are a ton of little Easter eggs spotted in its library that are just too good to ignore. First off, in a blink and you'll miss it moment, a book can be seen in the library shelves that has the same symbol on it as the famous Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. Either the production team are big fans, or Douglas Adams stopped by the library one day. There are also books labeled with the character names of Charlotte Hale and Carl Strand spotted in the stacks. And finally, there might even be something in the library that looks just like the astrolabe from the opening credits of Game of Thrones. Seeing as how both shows are HBO giants, maybe it's a little wink from the creators. A phrase that you might have heard popping up in Westworld that has become a pretty prominent plot point is the bicameral mind. It's the theory that Ford and Arnold use in the show in order to attach consciousness to their hosts. It's the way that they endow the host's artificial intelligence with self-awareness, with a pyramid that has memory at the bottom, improvisation and self-interest in the middle, and at the top, well, that they don't know. Arnold never quite figured out what resides at the top of the pyramid, which could be the reason that the hosts tend to malfunction. What you might not know is that this theory was not invented by the show, and was actually originated in 1976 by American psychologist Julian Jaynes, who had the idea that humans were only able to think for themselves after they had learned that their voice they hear in their head wasn't the voice of God, which is why it's only after Dolores and the other hosts realize that the voice in their heads is their own and not Arnold's that they become self-aware. We learn in season 2 just how giant and important the Delos Corporation really is, seeing as how they not only run Westworld but also 5 other giant parks that all do the same thing and are the world's leaders in artificial intelligence technology. But they are also important to Westworld because of the history, stretching all the way back to the 1976 film Future World, the second in the Westworld movie franchise. The creators of the show wanted to give a little shout out to the history of Delos, which we see in an episode in season 1 where Peter Abernathy is sent to cold storage. When we got to see the underground facility for ourselves, we found inside a giant metal globe with Delos written on it that happens to be an exact replica of the one seen in Future World, if not the exact same globe. And just like everything else in Westworld, Delos has more to it than meets the eye. Its name goes back thousands of years and carries a whole lot of weight that you might not have ever realized. Delos is actually an island in Greece that was extremely important during ancient Greek times, long regarded as a holy place to its ancient inhabitants. Because it was seen this way, Delos was the first place to pass what was known as the prohibition of death by the tyrant ruler Thucydides. Which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. He made it illegal to pass away or give birth on the island of Delos, though we're not totally sure how he would have enforced that or punished those who disobeyed. You can go ahead and imprison recently deceased people. We're not sure they really mind all that much. Worlds are, we do know that one of them is a samurai world, or shogun world as we now know it. But while it might have just seemed like a fun idea for the creators to throw out there is actually a bigger relationship between the shogun world and Westworld than meets the eye. The reason the creators specifically chose an Imperial Japanese motif for this other world is because of the way the Golden Age of Westerns and the Golden Age of Samurai cinema came up at the same time and share a place in cinema history. It also gave them a chance to work with a ton of actors that they hadn't met before, which is something that they really wanted to do. In season 1, they dropped a ton of hints about the direction that the show was going to go in before we even realized exactly what they were doing. This can be seen in a few ways, especially when it comes to Dolores. For starters, we saw Bernard having Dolores read to him from Alice in Wonderland. It might seem obvious now, knowing what we know, but there are huge parallels between Dolores' story and Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. It gets even more specific. When he has her read aloud, "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today, and yesterday, things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night." We'll say you have, Dolores. You can also say that the fact that she's in a light blue dress, just like Alice, before she wakes up is just yet another similarity between her and the Lewis Carroll character. Westworld has never been afraid to pull references from all sorts of sources, from the original movie to video games and, of course, other sci-fi classics. And what would a show about a seemingly well-controlled amusement park full of dangerous creatures who could turn violent and destructive without a moment's notice be, without at least one reference to the great Jurassic Park? Come on, they had to do at least one. When the technician Felix reveals that he's taken to trying to program his own tiny sparrow, he says, "Come on, little one," a phrase that mirrors the famous scene from Jurassic Park, in which Hammond is coaxing a baby raptor from its egg. How's that for some foreshadowing? When we learned in season 1 that Bernard was not only a robot himself, but also the robot replica of a man who once really lived and helped to found the park, our minds were completely blown. We found out that he was created as a doppelganger to the now deceased Arnold Weber and had been living as a host this entire time. Some viewers were already savvy enough to put together that some of the photos in the show were a little suspicious, and that Bernard's name, Bernard Lowe, is also an anagram for Arnold Weber. We just couldn't believe our eyes. While we all thought Maeve had broken free from her loop and had gone entirely rogue, a tiny flash of a computer screen made it clear that she was not as free as she thought. Once Bernard is reawakened, he tells her that even her desire to escape is part of her programming. And while she refuses to believe it, the computer doesn't lie. If you look closely, you can see different codes for recruit, manipulate, escape, and mainland infiltration. After looking back at the first 2 seasons of this amazing show, we think it's time for a rewatch before launching into season 3. What about you? Were there any other details from Westworld that we let slip past us? Did you catch all of these hidden details the first time around? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to keep up with the latest from ScreenRant.